Now despite this video featuring Thomas and Friends characters, this video is not made for kids, as it contains dangerous tools and toxic materials that are considered to be hazardous to children under 13. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, let it be known that this video was also dedicated to my grandmother, who passed away a few months ago. Alright, let's get this thing started. Hello everyone out there on YouTube, it's I, Train Guy 2004 signing on, and today we'll be taking a look at another custom engine. Today, we'll be taking a look at my custom model of Harvey the crane engine. As I said before in the last customs video, I said that my next two targets would be both Arthur and Harvey. And I decided that Harvey would be the next engine. I like Harvey. He's another very underrated character in my opinion, who has a rather cheerful personality. And he's an engine who has a very unique design, with it mostly still being a tank engine with a crane arm on top of his boiler.
I'm not just an engine, I'm a crane too!
Now originally, I didn't intend on making a custom of Harvey. I figured he'd be a more complex engine to make. Whilst at the same time, I was also questioning myself whether or not Bachmann would actually announce they would make a model of him in the future. And the chances of that happening are, for the most part, a very long time from now. That is, until one day while randomly scrolling through eBay like I normally do, I found a listing for this 3D printed shell of Harvey's bases, made to fit on an overall chassis, and it made me pretty curious, so I decided to buy it. Now, I do admit it's not a perfect print, as it's very big in comparison to how Harvey should be, and the crane arm doesn't spin, and the build for how the arm is positioned is square. But at the same time, it still had some nice details like the wheel on the crane arm and the printing of where the number plate would go. Plus, I mostly bought it to be like a Kickstarter in making customs using 3D printed parts. So eventually, after a long time of thinking, I decided to put it to use and make our favorite little crane engine. Let's talk about it. So first things first was trying to sand down some parts and giving it a nice undercoat, and I needed to find some sandpaper. So once again, I opened up eBay and bought a pack of some fine sandpaper sheets. I took the body apart and set to work. This was a very tedious process as I was trying to sand down some parts such as the smoke box, the boiler, and the mold on the number plate. And every time I did this, I always kept cutting off pieces, mostly ones that were for parts that were hard to sand like the boiler and funnel, given how small the body is, as well as for the smaller pieces like the pistons, buffer beams, and the crane arm and hook. And even sometimes I'd reuse that old nail file that I used in my custom of Lady, and this is what I ended up with. The sanding isn't perfect, there are some spots that are a bit rough, but it's not horrible either. Now on to the next step, priming and painting. Now unlike my custom of Lady, which was completely hand painted, I wanted to try spray painting the model this time, but still keeping some things hand painted. And the first thing to do was prime the body. So I took the body outside, placed the parts down on some newspaper, and began priming. The primer in question that I'm using here is Tamiya Fine Surface Primer, and this is the same type of primer that my brother uses for figures. Like with the sanding though, this part was also tedious, as there would be times where some spots were a little bit rough as well, mostly from the many times I sanded down the body and I had to go back and sand and respray a couple times. But after all that, I think I did a decent job just priming the body. On to the most difficult part, finding the right colors. Mainly yellow, black, brown, gold, and the main base color itself, burgundy, or Bordeaux, or maroon, or whatever it's called, and finding a type of spray painting like that was going to be quite challenging, as burgundy, Bordeaux, maroon, or whatever it's called is a deep reddish color with a hint of brown, and first finding the right paint that matched the same color was quite difficult. So So once again, I opened up eBay and even went on Amazon this time and looked to see what was the closest to Harvey's main livery. And I mostly looked at companies like Tamiya and Rust-Oleum. For Tamiya, they do actually have their own maroon spray paint, but when I took a good look at it, it seemed a little too brown. Then I looked at some more red-like colors like dull red, which looked nice, but after doing a bit of research, it looked like it might be a little too bright. Eventually, I finally landed on Rust-Oleum's Satin Claret line, which looked way more appealing to the eye. And after the paint dried, it gave off a nice smooth feel to the whole body. Granted, it did seem pretty darker than I imagined, but I think it'll do. Now that the spray painting was out of the way, it was time for the hand painting. Much like Lady, I decided to use the same Vallejo gold at the top of the funnel. However, for the rest of the body, I decided to use some different paints made by Cadelda Color. These are specifically paints for tabletop gaming, and I bought them at a local gaming store in Ellicott City. The paints I bought in question are Layer Flash Gits Yellow, Base Mornfang Brown, and Contrast Black Legion. And now that I had all the right colors, it was time for more painting. First, I masked off around the cab and side tanks to apply the black to the smoke box, footplate, and cab roof, and then I decided to do the same for the buffer beams and applied the brown to the buffers. And then I took the time and applied the yellow for the lining. The lining was again a very tedious process, as there would be times where the lining just didn't look good, and I ended up going back, sanding, and respraying all over again until I managed to get it to a decent level. It's not perfect, but I think it's a little bit better than what I did for Lady. Now that the painting was finally done, it was time for the clear coat. The clear coat I used in question is made by Krylon. And with the main body fully complete, it was time for the extra details. Unlike Lady, who just reuses a printed cutout of her name, I wanted to try reusing water slide decals for Harvey. So at first, I bought a sheet of 3 16-inch K4 Pacific water slide decals in gold. And it didn't arrive long after I ordered them at first. Yeah, despite ordering them, the decals did take a bit longer to arrive, and I even sent a request for a refund since they didn't arrive. But eventually the decals finally arrived, and at first I tried the decals on the crane arm and they looked nice, but after a while they just didn't really look as good, as they seemed to blend in a little too much for the paint job and you can hardly see it. So eventually I bought a sheet of yellow decals which looked much better. And basically my method of applying these to the model was that I cut them out, let them soak in water, and even used a tiny screwdriver to place them on. And next came the face.
Hello.
For the face, I chose to use a Thomas Wood Harvey face, specifically from the early 2018 variant with the exposed wood. Basically just took the face off, sanded down the back, and glued onto the smoke box. And I was quite shocked at how perfectly it fit. It doesn't cover the whole thing, but it's not a terrible fit either. The last big thing to do was fit the body to a chassis. Unlike Lady, who uses a more older chassis, this time I decided to buy a more later looking chassis, as it looked and sounded a lot better. Though when it arrived, it was a little tough getting the body to fit on the chassis with this little wire that's connected to the motor. So I had to sand on the inside a little bit to make it work. It was a little tough at first, but eventually the chassis finally managed to fit. Though it's not a perfect fit, as the pistons don't align properly and it can cause the side rods to easily fall out, but it still runs very smoothly. The last thing to do was paint the chassis. So the first thing to do was give the wheels an undercoat. So I used the same light gray I used for Lady, then I painted the rims on the wheels in yellow, and then I painted the ends of the side rods in black, and last came the rather tedious part, finding the right red. Specifically, a red that matched the rest of Harvey. So I did some more researching and comparing, and at first, I chose to use Citadel's Blood Angel Red. I first painted on the wheels and the side rods, and at first, it looked fine, but it still didn't match the same paint as Harvey, so I continued to search for more options. And this time, I decided to buy Vallejo's Dark Red, which looked much better. So after the paint arrived, I repainted the wheels and side rods with the dark red, And then I went back in and touched up some parts with the yellow and black, and then I gave the wheels and side rods a coat of matte varnish, while also going back and cleaning the flanges. And with that, Harvey was finally done. I'm honestly so happy with how he turned out. I think he turned out a lot better than I was expecting, and I think he turned out a lot better than my work with Lady, the latter of which I will be redoing soon, don't you worry. Granted, there are some things that aren't perfect, such as the lettering on the sides of the cabs, and there are some spots that do look a little bit rough, so I may end up going back and potentially redoing those parts. Unless Bachmann decides to finally make a new tooling for Harvey like they've done for characters like Daisy, Rebecca, and even Sir Handel, then I'll just turn this into something else. And if anybody out there would like to try their hands at making their own custom Harvey like I did, I will gladly place a link in the description to the seller I bought this shelf from, whom has made quite a few other 3D prints like Toby's Bases and an Audrey-inspired Percy. These prints aren't anything perfect, but they're really cute and are perfect for anyone who wants to get into custom modeling, as they are very simple and don't necessarily have a lot of parts. Anyways, enough rambling around, let's see this guy in action.